Action considered. A corporate partner of Planned Parenthood may face contempt of Congress charges. Restoring calm. Violent protests erupt in the wake of 2 more fatal police shootings. Priests remembered. Parishioners attend a memorial mass for murdered clergy in Mexico. And the importance of faith. The Republican ticket courts African American Christians. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 21st, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. A firm caught on camera in the undercover Planned Parenthood videos is at the center of controversy on Capitol Hill. Democrats walked out before Republicans approved contempt charges against STEM Express and its CEO, Kate Dyer.
The panel is entitled to this information so we can answer the question that is raised by the statute. Did companies improperly profit? A subpoena is not a suggestion, it is a lawful order, and a subpoena is to be complied with.
An unauthorized, dangerous, unjustified, illegitimate escalation of Chair Blackburn's partisan attack on health care and life-saving research.
Jason Calvi was there at the panel meeting and joins us now with more. Jason, now that they voted, what's the next step for the panel?
Well, Brian, Republican members of the panel say they hope this will force STEM Express to hand over requested documents, things like the names of its employees as well as accounting and banking documentation. In order for the charges to actually move forward, though, it would need the approval of the House or during a recess, the approval of the Speaker of the House. Brian?
Well, Jason, walk us through the background on this. How did it all begin?
Well, this investigative panel was started in response to those Planned Parenthood undercover videos that alleged that that entity was illegally selling and harvesting fetal body parts. Today, the committee said for the last 8 or 9 months, it's been requesting documents from STEM Express. That's a business partner with Planned Parenthood, sort of the middleman that took the fetal body parts from Planned Parenthood or other abortion clinics and then provided them to researchers. The committee, the panel, is asking for things like the names of employees as well as banking and accounting documents, and they say that STEM Express just hasn't complied. It hasn't given them everything that they requested.
Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you. Paul Ryan speaks out about another controversy involving Planned Parenthood. Lawmakers stalemated over Zika funding because Democrats insisted the abortion provider received some grant money. The Speaker of the House says the proposed compromise does not single out Planned Parenthood.
On Planned Parenthood, there was never an earmark for Planned Parenthood. There's not going to be an earmark for Planned Parenthood. And let me just rest assured, there will be no public funding of abortions.
And a challenge to North Carolina's law allowing magistrates to refuse to marry same-sex couples based on religious beliefs is dismissed. U.S. District Judge Max Cogburn ruled today the couples who sued lack evidence showing they were harmed directly by the law. He wrote, however, there is potential for harm in the law. The plaintiffs' lawyers say they'll appeal today's ruling. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Defense of Marriage Act by President Bill Clinton that happened September 21st, 1996. It denied federal recognition of marriage for same-sex couples. DOMA was never repealed. It was essentially overturned by U.S. Supreme Court decisions in 2013 and again last year. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Protests break out after the second high-profile police shooting in a week. The most recent cases are in North Carolina and Oklahoma. Protests erupt in North Carolina after Charlotte police shoot and kill a man Tuesday while trying to serve a warrant.
There is something going on across this nation that needs to be addressed. My child, my nephews, I am concerned.
Police say while officers look for the person named in the warrant, they encountered another man who they say was armed.
Make some imminent threat to them, and because of that, at least one of our officers fired rounds at the subject.
The officer involved in the shooting is now on paid administrative leave. The violent demonstrations in Charlotte followed protests in Tulsa, Oklahoma, over Friday's fatal shooting of an unarmed African-American man. Police video shows 40-year-old Terrence Crutcher walking to his vehicle with his hands up, followed by officers. He stands for a moment beside the SUV. Then Crutcher lies on the pavement, fatally wounded. Officer Betty Shelby is now on paid administrative leave. Her attorney defends her actions.
He gets to the window of the SUV and has his hands in the air, and his left hand goes into the window.
The criticism over the shooting is fueled by what's seen in the video and what's heard.
That looks like a bad dude, too, to be honest with you.
Crutcher's sister responds to that characterization of her brother.
That big bad dude was my twin brother. That big bad dude was a father.
The Tulsa Police Department temporarily shut down its Twitter account today. It says too many people were posting inappropriate messages in response to that shooting. The man accused of planning a series of bombs in New York and New Jersey is now facing federal charges. New evidence shows Ahmad Khan Rahami vowed to die a martyr. Wyatt Goolsby is here with more. Wyatt?
Brian, prosecutors charge Ahmad Rahami with the use of weapons of mass destruction, bombing a public place, and destruction of property. All this as investigators reveal more about the weekend bombings.
A federal complaint filed against the 28-year-old Afghan native paints a clear picture of the terror attack. The document connects Rahami to an explosive device left in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood Saturday. The explosion propelled the dumpster more than 120 feet and shattered windows 400 feet away. Rahami writes in his journal, "The sounds of the bombs will be heard in the streets. Gunshots to your police. Death to your oppression."
This is a copy of Mr. Rahami's journal.
Questions about whether Rahami was under the radar kicked off a Homeland Security hearing on Capitol Hill. House members heard from New York City's deputy police commissioner.
Is there anything we could have done differently to have stopped it?
Based on what I've seen so far as part of the investigation, he seems like many suspects who came into contact with the system at various times and was handled to the extent that the system, the law, and the guidelines that we operate under would allow them to.
During today's hearing, John Miller and law enforcement from several other states talked about how they can prevent future lone wolf attacks. In addition to New York and New Jersey, they highlighted recent attacks in Orlando, Dallas, and Minnesota. Miller says many of the attackers are inspired by ISIS.
People who are buying into a line of propaganda that promises valor, belonging, empowerment.
Congressman Jeff Duncan says federal agencies need to do more to prevent future attacks.
The guy that's accused of bombing in New Jersey and New York, his father notified the authorities. They investigated him for 2 months and said he wasn't involved in terrorism, when actually he was. Orlando, the same way. They investigated the guy, San Bernardino. So, there's a broader issue here.
New York City's deputy police commissioner says more than a dozen terrorist attacks have been prevented in his city through good intelligence and a robust counterterrorism program. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsby, thank you. And President Obama meets in New York City with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Today's meeting follows years of friction between the two leaders. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports. Lauren?
Brian, this will most likely be their last meeting before President Obama leaves office. The two have had a testy relationship as the president, like the Pope, has tried to push the Israelis to finally make peace with the Palestinians. It's a violent conflict that has been ongoing since Israel was declared a state in 1948.
Thank you.
The president attempted to debunk the narrative that the U.S.-Israeli relationship is strained by announcing the largest supply of military aid the U.S. has ever given another country.
Our hope is that we can continue to be an effective partner with Israel in finding a path to peace.
Obama revealed a 10-year military assistance deal worth $38 billion. It was welcomed by Israel.
I want to thank you for the extensive security and intelligence cooperation between our two countries. I don't think people at large understand the breadth and depth of this cooperation, but I know it, and I want to thank you on behalf of all the people of Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israelis will never give up on the goal of peace. But yesterday, President Obama, in his final UN address, suggested Netanyahu is less than serious about the two-state solution.
And surely Israelis and Palestinians will be better off if Palestinians reject incitement and recognize the legitimacy of Israel. But Israel recognizes that it cannot permanently occupy and settle Palestinian land.
Peace in the Middle East is a goal Pope Francis shares. In 2014, he invited then Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to the Vatican. They held a first-of-its-kind gathering of leaders engaged in conflict. The Holy Father asked them to join him in heartfelt prayer to God for the gift of peace. President Obama has hinted he may try another option to bring peace to the region, including a possible U.S.-backed UN security resolution, increasing pressure on Israel. Brian.
All right, thank you, Lauren Ashburn at the White House. Donald Trump looks for support from the African-American faith community. Trump and his running mate, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, met today with pastors in Cleveland. Ohio is considered a swing state, key to determining the election outcome. Boxing promoter Don King is now promoting the Trump ticket.
America needs Donald Trump. We need Donald Trump, especially black people.
The African-American faith community has been one of God's greatest gifts to America and to the American people. I will always support your church and defend your right to worship, always. I will always be there. Christian faith is not the past, but the present and the future. It is the foundation of progress.
Campaigning in Florida, Hillary Clinton outlines her economic plan in Orlando. Her campaign manager says she's also preparing for Monday's presidential debate.
I think what's concerning overall about Donald Trump is, first of all, he doesn't often tell the truth. So she's going to have to spend some time probably correcting the record and making sure that voters understand the facts.
The first presidential debate, moderated by NBC's Lester Holt, is Monday at New York's Hofstra University. Our Jason Calvi will be there. You can watch his coverage beginning Monday here on EWTN News Nightly. And the Capitol is already being prepared for January's presidential inauguration. All but the last of the scaffolding is removed from the dome after years of renovation. Today, the first nail ceremony was held. It signals the start of construction of the platform on the West Steps, where the swearing-in ceremony is held. Coming up, the push to save Christians in the Middle East from more persecution. And Pope Francis reminds pilgrims of God's infinite love and mercy.
Non abbiamo il potere di condannare il nostro fratello che sbaglia.
Pope Francis saying we don't have the power to condemn our brother, but the duty to recover his dignity and accompany him on his journey of conversion. At today's general audience in St. Peter's Square, he adds, this is the Church's commission, to be God's sacrament of mercy in every place and time. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis sends his condolences over the murder of 2 priests in the Mexican state of Veracruz. Parishioners gathered for their massive Christian burial Tuesday. The priests were last seen Sunday in the city of Poza Rica, where they served at Our Lady of Fatima Church. Their bullet-ridden bodies were discovered Monday on a roadside miles away. State prosecutors say they believe the priests knew their attackers and had been drinking with them. Some parishioners from their parish are skeptical. They say organized crime has plagued Poza Rica with killings and disappearances. Alan Holdren, Rome Bureau Chief for EWTN's Catholic News Agency, is joining us. Alan, how did Pope Francis respond to the news that 2 priests were murdered in Mexico?
After hearing about the murders, Brian, he sent a telegram to the local bishop, these 2 priests bishop, down in Mexico, condemning these acts of violence and also pledging his prayers for the local community and the victims' families. He also pledged his prayers for the eternal repose of the souls of these 2 priests who were victims, he said, of unexcusable violence. They're in Veracruz state in Mexico. They're now investigating these murders. The circumstances aren't altogether clear.
So the Pope visited Mexico earlier this year. Didn't he specifically address what he called a cycle of drugs and violence?
Yes, he was speaking to business leaders in February when he was there on the 17th. It was a whole arena full of local business professionals. And he said that they need to break this cycle of violence and drugs by creating decent work opportunities. He said the lack of decent work leads to poverty, which creates this breeding ground, he said, for the young people in particular to fall into the cycle of violence and drug trafficking.
It can be said, Alan, that Mexico is one of the world's most dangerous countries for priests. What information do you have about that?
Well, the local Catholic Media Center there in Mexico released information saying that 28 priests have died in Mexico since 2006. These 2 priests are in addition to that. They're in that state, the Gulf of Mexico state, called Veracruz, which is one of the 3 most dangerous states in Mexico for Catholic clergy. There was also a report from the U.S. State Department in 2015 on religious freedom worldwide saying that Catholic clergy in Mexico in particular are victims of death threats, of extortion attempts, and intimidation from local organized crime groups. So this is unfortunately nothing new there in Mexico, but the local bishop said it's also a sign once more that this violence and corruption are really rooted in the society there. And he asked for prayers from the entire world for them, for peace.
Thank you, Alan Holdren with EWTN's Catholic News Agency.
Thank you, Brian.
Colombia's president presents a peace agreement to the UN Security Council. President Juan Manuel Santos says his nation is full of hope. A peace accord between the government and the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, was hammered out this summer. It ends a half-century of violence. Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin will be present when the treaty is signed later this month. The UN Security Council takes up Syria's civil war. As a temporary ceasefire unravels, international tensions rise. One group hopes the UN will also focus on the religious liberty crisis in Syria. The Solidarity with the Persecuted Church group says in a new statement, Syria is a mess and the very welcome ceasefire is collapsing. We're glad the UN will be meeting to look for solutions. But we're concerned that the discussions and the deal-making will still leave Syrian Christians unprotected, homeless, and without the right to practice their faith without fear. Christina Olney is Director of Government Relations for In Defense of Christians. What is your take on the UN's approach to the plight of Christians in the Middle East?
Thank you for having me on the show, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. The United Nations and the international community should be commended for assisting the over 65 million refugees who are fleeing the maelstrom of violence and bloodshed that continues in Syria today, tragically. Countries like Jordan and Lebanon are hosting millions of these refugees. Lebanon alone now has 25% of its population that are refugees. These are staggering numbers. At the same time, the international community needs to do more to recognize the specific needs of the victims of genocide in Iraq and Syria, who too often are falling through the cracks of the international refugee system and of political negotiations about the future of these countries.
Has anything changed since your organization presented its petition to the UN?
Earlier this year, IDC launched the most comprehensive report detailing the crimes that ISIS has committed against Christians in Iraq. And a week after that report, the United States government made a statement recognizing the genocide that is taking place against these communities. So that silence has finally been broken, and we have also been successful in working with the U.S. Congress on important initiatives for the protection and preservation of Christianity in the Middle East. 4 resolutions were introduced at our National Advocacy Convention just this month on those issues.
Tell us why this impending Mosul operation in Iraq is so important.
The impending operation to liberate Mosul from ISIS is important because for the first time, Christians have hope that they'll be able to return home. There are only 200,000 Christians remaining in Iraq, a country that has more biblical history than almost any nation in the world. And many of these communities, the majority of them who I was visiting with earlier this year, want to return home. The Iraqi government has called for a province for these communities, and it is something that the U.S. government and the international community should support.
The Nineveh Plain province. So this is crucial to the resettlement of these Christians and other minorities.
We see it as the only viable solution for Christians to remain in Iraq. Christians are currently living in dire conditions in refugee camps, where they are living in caravans and with sub-minimal medical conditions and supplies. So if Christians are going to remain, they need security and stability, and they have the right to return to their homeland.
Christina Olney with In Defense of Christians, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, Jerusalem gets a new Latin leader, but he's likely to be temporary. And Mother Dolores Hart reflects on her path from Hollywood to religious life a half-century ago. St. Matthew, apostle and evangelist, is remembered by the church on this 21st day of September. Scripture tells us he was a tax collector who responded immediately to Jesus' call to follow him. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The world's oldest bishop has died. Archbishop Peter Garrity, who is 104, died last night at St. Joseph's Home for the Elderly in Ottawa, New Jersey. He is credited with restoring the Archdiocese of Newark's finances before retiring in 1986. Earlier in his priesthood, he founded an interracial social and religious center in Connecticut. The new leader of Catholics in Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories hopes to promote dialogue among Christians and with other religions in the Holy Land. Franciscan Father Pier Battista Pizzaballa replaces Fouad Toual, who had reached the mandatory retirement age of 75. The patriarch has traditionally been a native Arabic speaker. Father Pizzaballa, a 51-year-old Italian, says there's been no change in policy. He says he'll hold the position only until a proper and better candidate is selected. For the past 12 years, Pizzaballa has been responsible for protecting the holy sites in the Middle East. A famous actress turned nun celebrates 50 years as a Benedictine contemplative with her Golden Jubilee of vows. Mother Dolores Hart left a promising Hollywood career to enter religious life. Mother Dolores Hart joins us from the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Bethlehem, Connecticut, the author of The Ear of the Heart. It's available, of course, at EWTNRC.com. Mother, you're celebrating 50 years as a religious, a contemplative Benedictine. Have those 50 years lived up to your expectations?
I don't think I ever had a day in my life as beautiful and complete and totally surprising as the celebration of the Jubilee. I think when you always think that you know best, but when you're playing with God, He always finds a way to put you on your ear. And I think when I sat there and looked out at a couple of, I would say maybe even 100 of friends, people that I knew, and I looked in the faces of each one and realized that each one was absolutely unique and different. Each one had their own call and their own mission. And yet, when they were there together in that union of love, it was like a miracle of joy to be all together in that room.
Well, it's lovely to celebrate with you, and it's lovely to hear your parrot Bo back there with a little musical accompaniment, God's music, I might add. Mother, so many of us enjoyed the From Hollywood to Holy Vows mini-series on EWTN. Do you think that captured the essence of your story?
I think it did a very good job, but I think as you grow older, and I hope everyone of my viewers who's older feels the same way, you understand in more depth what you could have offered, what you could have done, what you could have said that would have been more meaningful. I think that each moment, each period of your life has its own value, and I think that one for what it was very, very good.
All right, and aren't you still a voting member of the Motion Picture Academy?
Yes, I am. I was notified that maybe this might be my last year.
Well, of course, you appeared with Elvis in the movies before you chose the path to God. Thank you, Mother, for saying yes to Jesus. Congratulations on 50 wonderful years.
You're very kind, and bless you.
What a beautiful witness. Thank you, Mother Dolores Hart. For the EWTN News Nightly team, thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. We're going to leave you tonight sharing colorful pictures from today's general audience with Pope Francis. Traditionally dressed pilgrims from Indonesia were among the thousands gathered in St. Peter's Square. Good night. May God bless you.